Hello, welcome to the EPG Pathshala program in linguistics. I'm Pramod Pandey, Center for Linguistics, Jawaharlal Nehru University. In the present module, we will take a close look at a subtheory of generative phonology, namely CV phonology. CV phonology is an instance of autosegmentalism, as we had mentioned in an earlier module. We will take a look at CV phonology in terms of its origin and in terms of the gains that we have in analyzing phonological phenomena using the CV phonological framework. The beginnings of CV phonology can be traced to the development of phonology in terms of shall we say, a hierarchical structure involving the syllable as a unit. In the standard generative phonology model, namely Chomsky and Haller, 1968, we have processes described without using the notion of the syllable. And the explanation for this was that all those phenomena that can be described using the notion of the syllable could also be described simply in terms of the consonant-vowel sequences. In a PhD thesis, Kahn, 1976, showed that actually there is need for incorporating the syllable in phonological theory. There are processes which cannot be accounted for adequately without bringing in the notion of the syllable. Now, the syllable as it was conceived in Kahn has a direct relationship between the segments and the syllable, as shown on the screen. Now, what we find here is that, let's say there are three segments, all of them belong to a single syllable, and now if there is a property, a phenomenon, a process which refers to a certain segment within the syllable, then the representation can make it clear as to how the syllable and the segment are related. Notice that without the notion of the syllable, there were attempts in the standard phonological model to try to explain the phenomena of stress. For example, we have seen before that in the processes of English stress placement in words, as well as Latin stress placement, the phonological rule form was quite complex. You have to express the generalization by introducing a whole series of segments and features, as you can see in the formulation of the Latin stress rule on the screen. Now, Kahn showed that, in fact, there were many generalizations in English phonology that required the specification of the syllable as a unit in phonology. One of the processes that directly involves the syllable is what is known as flapping. The flapping rule in American English says t and d, the alveolar consonants t and d, are flapped, that is, are pronounced as a flap, something like r, when they occur in a certain context. So we have these words such as bedding or weighted or rider, for how we pronounce them in Indian English as batting or weighted or writer or rider, etc. Now these ones are all pronounced with a flap in American English. Now how do we account for flaps, for flapping as a phenomenon? What is the context that we can provide for t, d to be flapped? The explanation that Kahn gives is that t and d occur as a segment which relates to two adjacent syllables. So in a word such as butter, let us say, the t is associated with both the following syllable, which has in it the as well as the preceding syllable, in which we have ba as sequences of segments. If there is a t in this kind of position, which is called ambisyllabic position, ambisyllabicity, then t are flapped. If not, then they are not flapped. So the notion of ambisyllabicity adequately explained the process of flapping in American English. Now, Cv phonology has this as a background, the fact that that the segmental elements like consonants and vowels need to have some kind of a relationship with higher level units such as the syllable. The Cv phonology says that there is an intermediate tier, that is the Cv tier, that lies between the segments and the syllable. This is the new proposal that Cv phonology makes. Now, the idea of Cv phonology actually was rooted in the description of the morphology, the non-concatenative morphology by John McCarthy in relation to the Semitic languages such as Arabic and Hebrew. Take a look at the Cvt representation of some certain forms. The Cvt, as you will know, occurs in the intermediate position between the syllable above and the segment below. The Cv tier is an autosegmental tier. What we mean by this is that a phenomenon which applies at the Cv tier need not apply at the segmental tier, and vice versa. A phenomenon that applies at the segmental tier need not affect the Cv tier. That's how Cv phonology is an autosegmental theory of phonology. Now let's go into the details of Cv phonology. What are the features of the Cv tier? Number one, the Cv tier as conceived of in Cv phonology is a tier that represents timing slots. So each segment, a C or a V, represent a timing slot. What it means is that there is a way available to us to show whether a single segmental representation actually takes just one timing slot or two timing slots. And this way allows us to distinguish between various types of speech sounds. For example, the difference between affricates and consonants, a sequence of two consonants. Take a look at the two words represented on the screen, kapfo and kapso. As you notice that in one of the words, the number of timing slots or Cv units are 4, and in the other one, 5. What does it signify? What it signifies is that the segmental sequence of p and f is actually a single consonant, whereas the segmental sequence of p and s are two consonants. So that's how we distinguish between a sequence of two consonants constituting two consonants, two timing slots, and a sequence of two consonantal segments which actually are a single consonant. The fricatives in Cv phonology are represented as two consonantal symbols but with one timing slot. The same way of distinguishing between a sequence of segments and an affricate is also extended to distinction between a geminate consonant and an affricate. Whereas an affricate has a single timing slot, a geminate has two timing slots but a single consonant. Look at the representation on the screen. In Hindi we have these two words, pata means address, and patta means a leaf. Now, pata has a single segment, whereas patta has two segments. Now, patta is shown to is represented by only one consonantal symbol, ta, just like pata is, but the difference is that patta being ta being a geminate consonant has two consonant positions in the on the CV tier. So this is another way of distinguishing between sounds. That is, the CV tier has a certain function. It distinguishes between different types of segments. The same is the case with a sequence of two vowels and a diphthong, whereas the diphthong is represented as being one vowel with two actual vocalic symbols like R and E being a single vowel, and a sequence of two vowels R, E being actually two V's on the CV tier. So this way we notice that the CV tier has multiple functions in explaining the difference between segments in terms of their representations. The CV elements are seen to represent two parts of a syllable, the peak and the non-peak. V stands for the peak element and C stands for the non-peak element. Now this has very interesting consequence of distinguishing, let's say, between segments such as a syllabic consonant and a non-syllabic consonant. We all know that a syllabic consonant is a consonant that is counted as a single syllable. So in British English, actually in native English varieties, we have two types of these nasals and liquids such as r and l, m and n. One is normal segment consonants such as n in note and r in ride, l in like, m in most, etc. And these segments also they function as syllabic consonants. That means they are treated as vowels in terms of their function. Now, there is a very simple way of showing the similarity between these two types of consonants. Those which are non-syllabic, that is consonantal in nature, and are always non-peak in occurrence, are seen to be represented or linked with the element C. So an N or a M or a R or a L linked to the element C is a non-syllabic nasal or liquid, whereas a syllabic nasal or liquid is associated with the element V, and that's how the syllabic elements are seen to function as syllabic. They occupy the position of the peak in a syllable. Let's take a look at the difference in these two varieties of English, native English, and an Indian variety of English. Most Indian varieties of English, for example, Hindi English, do not have syllabic consonants. Instead, the consonant, the nasal or the liquid is preceded by a vowel between two consonants. As we all know, historically, all syllabic consonants result from the loss of an adjacent vowel. So we assume that a word such as button, the there must have been a vowel there between t and n which got deleted, but the syllabicity of that sequence has been maintained. So n is pronounced as a syllabic consonant. In varieties such as Indian English, second language varieties, we do not have such a situation where the vowel is deleted after a consonant and the nasal or the liquid is pronounced as a syllabic consonant. So in Indian English, the representation of a form such as button will be as shown on the screen, with a vowel between t and n, and the representation of the form pronounced in English will be without that vowel. Moreover, the n, the syllabic nasal, is seen to be associated to the V element in native English varieties. Clements and Kaiser, in their work on Cvt phonology, point out that the relation between the Cvt tier and the segmental tier is one of constituent relationship, just as the relation between syntactic units is. The difference, however, is that whereas in syntax there may be multiple constituent relationships, there may be a depth or a hierarchy in relationship. In Cvt phonology, there is no such depth or hierarchy. The segments are directly related to the Cvt tier. Because we have a tripartite representation of words as segments and then Cvt tier and then the syllable, we can have rules referring to any one of these, and that's the claim that made by autosegmental phonology, and that also is the evidence of the fact that all these three are autosegments, that is, segments that occur independently of one another. Take a look at the screen for the different types of processes that refer to the segments or the syllables or the Cvt tier. Clements and Kaiser also proposed the notion of core syllables, an extremely useful notion. It helps us classify different types of syllable structures. For example, we have languages in which you have only a certain type of syllable structures, such as CV or CVC or VC. Now, the phonological structure, the syllabic structure of words in these languages can be described in terms of CV. So a syllable being CV type or CVC type, etc. This helps us to group languages in terms of different syllable structures. Now, this is analogical to the use of the terms subject, predicate, complement, object in word order typological systems. So just as we have SVO, SOV type languages, similarly we have languages which permit certain types of syllable structures, CV type or CVC type, and others don't. So one of the universals, for example, as it has been discovered in terms of Cvt phonology, is that there is no language in which there is no CV type syllable structure, whereas there are languages in which there are no CVC type structures. So the coda consonant may or may not be found in some languages, but the syllable with a vowel necessarily is found in all languages. So we have generally the CV structure type most commonly found in world languages. Now, there are other things that you do with this CV structure. For example, constraints about which we have spoken. So you can't have a syllable sequence of syllables with only open syllables such as VV. When languages come to have them on account of word formation, then there are various processes that are found to take place, as discussed earlier too. For example, one of the vowels may be dropped, or either the first one or the second one, or there may be a consonant like wa or a la, ya, ma, that can be inserted between two vowels. So these processes can be described as shown on the screen. Another consequence of for phonological theory on account of the Cvt phonology is the description of constraints, syllable structure constraints in languages. These constraints are found to motivate certain phonological processes. Also, they distinguish between different types of syllable structures as discussed above. Thus, we have a way of representing consonants in terms of positive constraints or negative constraints. Positive constraints are those which say that there must be a certain consonantal structure that should be present in a language, and negative constraints say that certain consonant structures are not permitted in a language. Thus, For example, in standard Hindi, you have a sa followed by a consonant, general consonant structure, which is permitted in standard Hindi, but in non-standard Hindi or in many dialects around Hindi, there is no sa followed by a consonant cluster. For example, in Punjabi there isn't, and in the varieties spoken in Uttarakhand, for example, the sa followed by a consonant structure are not there. So what happens when a word, let's say from a language such as English or standard Hindi, is borrowed in these languages? What happens is that there is a kind of a consonant which is, or a vowel which is inserted either between the two or before two. So in Punjabi you will have a vowel in between the two, so you say a word like school will be pronounced as sakul, whereas in some dialects, non-standard dialect of Hindi, for example, a word like school will be pronounced as is-cool. Now, how do we account for it? For these two phenomena, we account for them as actually being functionally related. Although they are two entirely different phenomena in terms of their surface description. In one case, there is E inserted at the beginning, and in another case, we have A inserted between sa and the following consonant, but both of them have the same function, namely, not allow the constraint, that is, no sa and consonant cluster, to be permitted. So because they are debarred from being permitted in the languages may resort to different means. Now, this way of explaining constraints has led to a very economical way of showing functional relationships amongst languages. If we can discover these constraints at work in different languages, we can easily see that apparent superficial differences in the form of phonological rules actually can be explained as motivated by the preservation of a single constraint across those languages. We have thus had a quick tour through Cvt phonology. In the beginning, the Cvt phonology appeared to be an independent theory of phonology as part of the autosegmental phonology. However, as the phonological theory has developed, the Cvt level representations have come to be accepted as part of the overall prosodic phonological representations. We'll look at them in the following modules. Thank you.